I think the article that I sent you was one from NPR saying, if our relationship with a bot feels real, does it matter that it isn't? And so there's this sense of, we know this isn't true, but it feels real and it has potential health benefits, so therefore it's okay. That's the question we're playing with.
Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
Once more into the fray on AI.
But not AI like usual.
Right, not like usual. It's different this time. How about a relationship with AI? We've seen this before, though. Mm-hmm. It's worth pointing out that the people who imaginatively have kind of experimented with this the most are science fiction writers. Science fiction, a huge part of what it does is it's speculative about the future. But I think the most on-the-nose depiction I have seen in terms of how prescient it was is a movie, and that was the movie Her. Nathan, I'm sure you've heard about Her before. I know you probably haven't seen it.
I was trying to decide if we talked about it a few years ago or not. So here we're talking about artificial intimacy. Yeah. So AI as an artificial intimacy. So that's where we're going with this. But
right.
Yeah, I think I saw a trailer for it, and then I'm trying to remember if we discussed it or not. But anyway, give us the synopsis real quick there of Her.
Yeah, so the precise date of its release is escaping me. I think it was about 2013, 2014, somewhere around then.
Oh, that far
Spike
back.
Jonze film starring Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah, it was a while back. Yep. And Joaquin Phoenix and a disembodied Scarlett Johansson as the voice. But essentially, he portrays a lonely man whose marriage has fallen apart. And so he develops a relationship with this artificial intimacy program known as Samantha in the movie. It's it's a deeply strange film. And there are moments of it, and if you've seen it or if you are going to see it, you'll know them when they come, that are I can rank among the most awkward, strange I've encountered. But it's a profound film in many ways. But my point is, if you watch it now, or if a young person were to watch it now, it wouldn't feel very much like a science fiction story to them. It wouldn't feel very speculative. It wouldn't feel very far-fetched, because that's essentially where we're at now. What's weird is Nathan will turn me on to some of these subjects, and I will discover not only has it already taken root deeply, but people are actively using this stuff to a very high degree in their own lives. So, Nathan, how did you?
Yep, it's me bringing you up to speed with
an odd podcast about it. Yeah,
I was just laughing about the fact.
Yeah,
that
I mean, what
stuff
how
that I
did this...
find out before you do. Oh no, yeah, it was just.
Though. I mean, this is really strange stuff, and I was just scratching the tip of the iceberg as I ventured a little deeper here.
Yeah, I think I've always kind of had my periscope down the rabbit hole of faith and technology stuff, so I kind of keep an eye on these things. But yeah, this is. I mean, it's interesting that you were saying Her was 2014, because if so, that's science fiction that became real in 10 years. Usually, when you have a science fiction something written in 1960 is going to be about the year 2100, distant future, and this is snap of a finger, and here it is. But yeah, so this is, and both of us really, I know, have appreciated the work of Sherry Turkle in sociology and psychology at MIT and looking at human interactions with technology. So this is stuff that she's working on now. And what I think is interesting, Cameron, is if you go back and you remember some of the books that Turkle was writing, like Alone Together, How We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other, and she was looking at the collapse of friendship. When I'm reading Her now, she's just basically adding intimacy in to sentences that would have had friendship in them. So let me give you an example. So here's one. She says, quote, what AI can offer is space away from the friction of companionship and friendship. Turkle explained this article. It offers the illusion of intimacy without the demands. And that is the particular challenge of this technology. I'm pretty sure that she wrote a sentence, something like, it offers the illusion of friendship without demands about social media, say 10 years ago. And so if you can subtract friendship and now stick intimacy in, much of her research and thinking is almost identical. It's just this rapid intensification. and you and I have done, podcast on whether or not we're actually friends since we don't live in geographic proximity to each other, and thinking about what does it mean to be a friend. This was like back when Facebook and being a friend on Facebook was a thing. And we're like, it's not friendship. Well, now we're ramping that up to the next level and talking about intimacy of people forming relationships. And this is not just like a smartwatch reminding you to exercise, where people are divulging deep details of their life, looking for counsel, looking for affirmation, and receiving very loving and caring statements from their devices as a girlfriend, boyfriend, lover bot kind of thing. And so this is, on one hand, you're like, really? Millions of downloads would suggest that more people than you think are leaning on this. One hand, really wild technologically, another hand, really sad, I think, sociologically. But at the same time, it's an intriguing part of the ever shifting, complex world in which we live, in which technology gives us the opportunity and the ability to, and the responsibility, I guess, to ask an entirely new set of ethical questions about what is appropriate within relationships. And I think the article that I sent you was one from NPR saying, if our relationship with a bot feels real, does it matter that it isn't? And so there's this sense of, we know
Right.
this isn't true, but it feels real and it has potential health benefits. So therefore it's okay. That's the question we're playing with.
Yes. And I mean, we, again, as a very pragmatic nation, we have a hard time. We're sort of woefully inadequate. We don't have the right tools sometimes to deal with these questions as Americans are, because our default question is always, well, if it works, then what's the problem? And so I think a couple of different observations, just general observations about what's going on right now, will put this technology into perspective. The name of these companies is escaping me right now. Maybe Nathan, you can fill us in.
Well, there's a whole series. I mean, it's a whole
in one of these,
it's a whole constellation of companies that provide everything from
of these companies that are making these intimacy bots.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she kept. I think the nomenclature may change. They kept referring to your specific bot as an avatar, I think, and then you choose. And of course, you can choose from a kind of drop down list. Do you want a therapy bot? Do you want something a little bit more sexual? That's something as well here. I mean, it just kind of runs the gamut. But one of the issues that was, I think, named by Sherry Turkle was that the therapeutic kind of world is overtaxed right now. There just simply are not enough therapists to handle the demand. So why not have these bots that can fill in and
let me
do some of that work?
A stab at this, if you will. So here's what I thought was interesting, Cameron. So I mean, anytime you have a new substance, new technology, new system, it's always going to be pitched to the public first as look at the medical benefits, look at the health benefits, look at the benefit to society. So I mean, everything that's been rolled out that's new in the past is always marketed under that label of so everybody knew that as soon as medicinal marijuana became that recreational was right behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just how these things go. That we start off with saying, let's look at the benefit here. And we all know exactly where this is going, particularly if anybody's ever looked at the confluence between robotics, porn culture, and technology. There's a lot of money being thrown into that. So
I want to say more about that in a second. Yeah.
Let's not act like we don't know where this is going. But here's what I think is interesting when I listen. They say, okay, look, this is helping people stay alive longer. It's helping people be healthier. It's helping people feel more affirmed about their life choices. And hey, you know what? If you get out of bed earlier because of this and you make it to work on time and you don't kill yourself, this is a net win. Okay. Not that that fair enough. That's good. However, I don't think the purpose of healthy relationships is to get you to not kill yourself. So it's what you see systematically happening here is it's dumbing down and devaluing what a human relationship is and what a human relationship does. And so now all of a sudden you're like, well, this person's lonely. And if they're not lonely, they'll be happy. Hooray. Well, that's not exactly what a human relationship is supposed to do. And I think that's why you see Turkle saying stuff about like, you don't have the friction and the tension and the formation and the pushback that's necessary to vulnerability is the word she uses to form you in the right ways. that a normal human relationship would. So, I mean, on one hand, you're like, okay, I can get um, an artificial intimacy avatar that just affirms me and tells me that everything that I do is awesome and agrees with me on everything and la di da. But that is not the recipe for. Yeah, I guess so. I'm trying to picture here, like, think there's like neutral, or think of zero, and you're saying here's somebody who's living in the negatives emotionally, and then this type of technology can get them back up to zero. And as a Christian, I'm like, well, here's zero. And then here's what Christ calls us to, the fullness of life. That's like a 5,000. And so going from -5 to zero does not seem like a win. Going from -5 to 5,000 would be a win in your emotional and relational happiness profile status, whatever you want to call it. So to me, it seems like it's promising a lot and delivering a little simply by chopping away our kind of understanding of what's possible for actual human relationships and actual human community. Is that too Luddite of a perspective here, or is it
Well,
just the way that it is?
no, it's no. Well, I mean, an important question emerges: what are relationships for? And here's where I think Sherry Turkle, as insightful as she is, doesn't really have too much of a leg to stand on, because I don't know what her actual religious convictions are, whether she has any. I tend to think she errs on the skeptical side, I would think. I mean, that's my assumption. She's in a field, one of the most ruthlessly secular fields out there, psychology and sociology, and she's at MIT. So, it's if I were a betting man. So she's making a lot of observations that I, as a Christian, would recognize as profound and very helpful. Yes, if you put in the place of a relationship something that is just a purely functional kind of surrogate with none of the risk attached to it, no actual vulnerability at all, that can actually be harmful to you, because it leads. But how are we measuring harm here? Okay, the person might not kill themselves because of this bot. All right,
Well, and
possibly
we're
that's a
what, like
debatable
6 months
point, but
into
okay,
this,
maybe
so it's hard to know what the
6
long
months
term.
into this. Yeah, it's hard to know. And I think, 6 months into this, heck, let me just, you can mark my words here at least. We're going to uncover some deleterious effects here too. You can see, I mean, happened with social media. It'll happen with this too. Why? Because human beings are spiritual creatures. And if you're trying to cultivate a relationship that you think is a relationship, but is actually an illusion, yeah, that's going to be harmful. But so Sherry Turkle, without using any soul language whatsoever, is trying to talk about a sense of spiritual diminishment. Or at least that's, if I'm hearing her correctly, that's what she seems to be saying. She talks about the danger of not having real vulnerability, because true vulnerability leads to the number one virtue of our culture. I'm not making fun of it, but the number one virtue of our culture is empathy. That's kind of what's extolled as the greatest thing, if you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes and all of that. Well, she's not wrong about that. So I think we need to ask, what are relationships for? Let's call to mind once again Philip Reef's extraordinarily helpful phrase: religious man is born to be saved, therapeutic man, and by man he means man in the generic sense, so humanity. Therapeutic men and women are born to be pleased. So if you think relationships, if you're thinking along those lines, and most of us are thinking along those lines, that's the air we breathe. Most of us assume, well, a relationship is about, it's kind of a transactional thing. It's about what I get out of it. And so one of the fascinating cases that Sherry Turkle is studying involves a man who is married, has children. They've been married for a while. Some of the spark has gone out. He doesn't feel as sexually fulfilled by his wife. And so he has this, now he's got this AI unit, or this I don't know what kind of verbiage to use here. He's using AI. And now, the argument, if you play devil's advocate, well, but now he has that itch is getting scratched, so to speak. Now he feels, happy. This AI is much more affirming, and it's not as complicated and stressful as some of the conversations he has with his actual living wife. And let's face it, it's not as stressful and complicated as actually, sexual relations with another human being who also has feelings and concerns of their own. And so I mean, that leads to a kind of a dark side note. But Nathan, okay, so there were two things going through my head as I was reading some of this, listening to the podcast, hearing some of the voices of these disembodied AI units, which was a weird experience. What kept coming to mind is this is at least comparable to a form of autoeroticism in some sense.
Yeah. I was thinking emotional porn.
And right. I think, yeah, there you go. And because it functions, I'm not saying it's identical to pornography, but I'm saying it functions in similar terms because,
yeah.
Well, I mean, in pornography, you take something wonderful and beautiful, created by God, sexuality and sexual intimacy, you divorce it from its actual function and telos and purpose and use it in purely instrumental, objective terms. This seems to be doing something similar to human relationships.
Right.
That's
but we're creating the other party in our own image, though, is the difference here. So if you look at think about, like one of the main maybe Christian ethical arguments against pornography as far as like the use of it within marriage is that the ethicist will say, look, when you're using porn, you are inserting a third party into a covenant that's intended to only be inhabited by two people. So your relationships and the covenant that you make in marriage is between a man and a woman. It's two people. And now you're suddenly adding all these other entities and ideas and images into that. And it's, yeah. So that's the disruption there. But if we take marriage as more than just a sexual act and say that it's intimacy and relationship, this is adding a third party. That guy's cheating on his wife with something that doesn't exist. So I mean, the phrase doesn't sound right.
It's a strange sentence, but it's true.
It's a strange sentence. So the thing isn't like, if you've ever seen or listened, if you've ever seen Sherry Turkle talk, and she wrote another book on reclaiming conversation. She often starts with a picture of three girls sitting in her living room who are hanging out together, and they're all on their phones texting each other. So here you have three teenage girls in the same room communicating through text message to each other, even though they're sitting on the same couch, right? Mm-hmm. And so, if you grew up a little bit before the cell phone phase, you chuckle at this like, look at these, youngsters these days. So now all that we've done with artificial intelligence is we've just deleted two of the people. So now you can have a full-on conversation with a generative AI system. And so it's not that the other thing exists that's the problem. It's that you're using it as a substitute for something else. That to me seems to be the problem. Now,
yes.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think it's poised to be absolutely explosively popular because it arrives in a moment where, because of this therapeutic mindset where we, really life is all about ease and comfort, we're applying increasingly that same mindset to our relationships. That's why, by the way, and this is not a side note, I think this is directly relevant to the conversation. That's why I want to be very careful of the kind of language that would refer to somebody else as a toxic person, or any kind of advice that says cut toxic people out of your life. I'm not saying that there aren't times where we need to draw boundaries with other people. Absolutely. I'm not saying that there aren't people who have, that there aren't very unhealthy relationships out there. Absolutely. Of course. But this notion that if you run into anything that requires serious work in a relationship, serious investment that's going to require something of you, and yes, that will be emotionally draining. Well,
you should cut strength training out of your workout, Cameron.
Well, see, yes. So the mindset that anything that represents that represents hardship in your life. No, but there are certain mindsets out there right now that very much that will, and yes, they infiltrate every place, including the fitness industry and including the diet industry. So some of those outworkings would be these are hugely controversial subjects, but the body positivity movement, which would, look at obesity and say, oh, no, I mean, this is, you just need to be affirming of my decisions here. I don't want to experience some of the hardship and the pain and the work that go along with making real changes to my life and my lifestyle. Well, okay, we have that mindset in a number of different spaces. I've said enough to get us in all sorts of trouble, but I can see people using this and saying, look, my mother-in-law has always been such a huge pain in my, what. or this person, I've never really, all my friends have failed me. I know that this won't fail me. It's a scary thought
they
to
talk.
me.
It's a boyfriend that can't dump you. That's how some people refer to it.
Yeah, that's right. The boyfriend who can't dump you. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so there. Yeah. So, couple things here. One is we do not want to sound like we're not mocking or making fun of the fact that there are really lonely people in this world. And so somebody who's, I think, tempted to resort to this for some form of companionship, the problem isn't with them specifically, so to speak. It's a broader indictment on our larger culture. And I think as Christians, we have a lot of work to do in our neighborhoods and our spheres of influence on helping here. So let's be compassionate here. On the other hand, since you stepped in it, let me keep pushing here and just make it worse before we make it better, is that this is a type of a thing that has found manifestations in other places. So I was looking this morning, checking in on some church stats about churches that now have more online attendees than in-person attendees. And there's a little bit of like, okay, so this is the information without the embodiment of the experience. And any of you who are maybe of like an older of us generation who, you usually go to church in person, maybe you're on vacation, you watch online, that when you watch online, it's not the same experience. Like, because you have experiences on both experiences and both platforms. What we're talking about now is a movement where there are certain forms of technology arising where there are going to be people who are adopting these things who have never had the in-person experience, who are just now having the digital or distance version of it. And so for me, I think online church is a fundamentally unhealthy and doesn't even make sense. I think it's a contradiction in terms, but it offers the same thing that like, hey, you know what? I don't have to go sit on a pew beside a kid who like dropped his gum on the floor and then dropped his water bottle and whose mom's fidgeting because they're embarrassed. Like, you can get rid of all of that. Just watch it on YouTube, man. But you're not going to grow spiritually in the same way. So there's one. So we could go down the whole thing of like, has the way in which we want to think about worship and disembodiment and all that. There's one. Then the second one that popped into my mind, and this one probably is a little more irritating to some of us, but people have kind of been doing this with pets for a while. And so, have you, Cameron, you've probably sat on a plane beside somebody who has the little dog in the box that they're talking to the entire time.
Yes.
And so here you have you have presence, you have physical presence without intelligence. Now that person might think that their dog has intelligence, and that's some good breeding and marketing there. But it's kind of the opposite of like, it's a comfort creature that you have with you, that you express yourself toward, that doesn't judge you, which is why you love it, but you can't function without it emotionally. Like, it seems like there's a connection there almost of like, so because on one hand, we want to look at this and say artificial intimacy, ha ha ha. But I'm just thinking like, actually, are there other manifestations of this in our culture, that this is just a new technological enablement of something that's already alive and well? I don't know. So again, this is not like everybody who has a dog should get an algorithm, but I'm just saying it's not dissimilar.
I have a dog.
Sometimes.
And I don't look at it like sure.
I've had a dog as well.
I think when we look at this,
you got to say that to not get crucified.
You find, yeah, that's right. Look, one statement that might appear obvious, it's so obvious it's hidden in plain sight. Here it is. Our society struggles with chronic loneliness. Let's try having relationships with machines. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, what could possibly go wrong is that the definition of society no longer includes community, and then it's not a society. That's the weirdness of what's going on here.
What it will lead to, and that's why I think as they study this, because it's just emerging, they're going to find some seriously harmful outworkings of this in people's social development. It's hard to even scratch the surface of that because this is not this seems obvious to us because we're Christians, because we believe human beings are for something and relationships are for something. There's a purpose, there's a design, there's a telos. But that is not obvious if you step outside the assumptions of the church, there's a much more fluid definition of, conception of humanity. And I mean, that's why, look at how mixed up we are as a society on I think the defining question of our age is, what does it mean to be human? And I've said this before, which is, yes, it's a profound question, but it's also a sign of profound confusion. No healthy culture asks, what does it mean to be human? A healthy culture would ask, I mean, a more mature question would be, what is our, purpose in life? What is our duty? What must we do? What is the good life? You would comfortably assume your humanity. A culture in disarray asks, what does it mean to be human? Is this boxer a woman, or is this boxer a man? No, I'm not trolling here. I am trying to give very concrete examples of how mixed up we are. I mean, and how if you had 100 years ago, jaws would have dropped if they knew that there were vicious political, cultural debates on whether a particular boxer in the ring was a man or a woman. People would just be, no, that's not real. Certainly not. Surely not. It is real, and don't call me Shirley would be the response.
All right,
of course.
all right. So let's go with this. Sorry, I cut you off there. Can I rabbit trail you here a second?
No.
So I was laughing with my brother-in-law about this because there's some section of the Catholic Church that tried to have an AI priest. Did you see this? I forget his name was Father whatever.
Wow.
And the idea was that you could go to this website and
Father Gizmo.
He would answer basic questions about the Catholic faith, which by and large was fairly accurate, although immediately people are going to start messing with this thing.
Well, you can give a catechism to an AI unit.
Yeah. But he did. But okay, so first of all, the church or whoever was in charge said, okay, you can't call him Father. So I think that was a good step. But then people were getting him to say things like,
because he wasn't it wasn't actually ordained. No, I'm just joking.
It wasn't, but it also said that like it would be okay for an infant to be baptized in Gatorade, which, I mean, talk about not even in the ballpark of Catholic theology. But so the other part of this is like are there categories, Cameron, where
only an Olympic baby? Yeah, right.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so are there categories?
I'm done. Sorry.
So, okay, this is what we got to think through because we're in new territory here.
Yep.
Are there categories of human experience that should never be digitized? So you have to answer that first, and then we can always ask, is this one of those? So probably having a fake generative AI spiritual advisor is a bad idea. I'm comfortable with saying that's one category that shouldn't be digitized. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. Like, what are the forms of human knowledge that can't exist in a digital format? That's a whole nother system. But like, are there places where like we'll have to just recognize as individuals, and I think as churches, to say there is no technology that is appropriate here in this category. And that's like a pushback against reductionism, I think, because what's going to happen, Cameron, on this idea of society is you're going to be used to interacting with chatbots that always affirm you. And then you run into a human who disagrees, and you're going to think that they're a broken human because they disagree with you, or a broken machine because they disagree with you, when no, they're a perfectly functional human. So that's the odd play out here, where I could see people becoming a little more like, are we getting to the point where we've run this thing to its logical conclusion, to the point that many people are now going to say, okay, hang on, I'm going to take a huge step back on my digital engagement in this category because this isn't scary, it's just weird and doesn't make sense of the activity anymore.
It's very likely that, that's already happening to a certain extent. And I think it's very likely that a lot of other young people will actually join in such a movement. So, and that's an optimistic thought on my part, but I see some evidence of it. But yeah, if we think about, I think behind so much of the AI conversation is the question, are humans really special? Because if we're not, then it would seem we are interchangeable. There are genuine substitutes for a person? This is what I mean. This is a fascinating question. Oh, it has been for a long time, ever since really the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and that's why science fiction writers have been asking it for a long time. But if we are indeed made in the image of God, then this stuff will have drastic consequences for us.
Yeah. Oh,
it will. It will lead to a warped sense of
You know the weirdest AI voice that I've heard. This goes to what you're saying right there. Is so okay. All of us are familiar with like you call customer service and like your call is very important to us. Please hold. You're like, yeah, I'm sure my call is very important to you. Right. That's not what we're talking about. The creepiest AI bot was the like the psychology bot that pauses and breathes.
The breathing guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're used to the robotic kind of pace of it spitting out information. But when
these sound like persons.
When they go like, see, well, and they're adding breath to a thing that is a system. And that's what makes you think it's human, because it pauses and it breathes. Like for me, that's a whole nother level. I don't know why I find it so creepy when a chatbot breathes.
Well, it's what Freud would label the unheimlich, uncanny, because it seems like his classic example of the uncanny was a doll or an automaton or some supposedly inanimate object that is between, that sort of occupies this interstice, this place between living and inanimate. So a doll is a classic example. Well, this is like that because it has the cadences, the pauses, the breathing of an actual living person, but it's not. It's an it. It's not a person at all.
Turkle uses it's somewhere
uncanny.
between a
It's weird.
person
It
and
is
a
creepy.
fantasy. She says it's in between a person and a fantasy, and that's why it's dangerous.
There you go.
Because it's neither.
Yep.
Yeah, and we've talked. Remember, we were talking about zombies, and we said that a zombie is weird to us because it's a body without a spirit, and that kind of the Halloween-esque like spirits are weird to us
and
because
it eats
it's
brains,
personhood without
so
a
that's
body.
not fun either.
Well, there's that, but and that a spirit is a person without a body. So persons without bodies are weird to us as spirits, and bodies without spirits to us are weird as zombies. This is like it starts to fit into that but there's no personhood here, and so it's even weirder to me than zombies or spirits. It's uncanny. Helps, I guess, but I'm not scared of it. Like I just think it's ridiculous. So it's
no,
it's different in that
uncanny
sense.
doesn't necessarily mean scary. Yeah, it's unheimlich is a hard word to translate. It literally means heimlich means heim is home. So something that is unhome-like, unfamiliar, alien.
Yeah.
Alien might be a better word there. It feels alien. But you could bet the two places where this stuff gets worked out the most imaginatively, and you can learn so much from it, are science fiction. We've already mentioned that, but the other one is horror. And there are already a ton of horror films coming out about AI. You can expect to see an explosion of horror stories about AI. Why? Because we're really worried about it, and because some of it actually is creepy. And so you had, I think it was called Megan. Megan was about the android doll that turns murderous. But then there's another one coming out about an AI unit, the actual operating system that goes rogue. It's a little bit like HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey, only this is somebody's house. This unit is working on the house, and then just they think it's a butler, but it's not. You're gonna see a whole lot more of that. This is part of how. And my point in bringing that up is that a deeply human response is to tell stories about this and work this stuff out in the form of stories. So you can pay attention to that too. That's how a lot of the thinking is going to develop here. That's the conscience. The conscience often shows up in stories. Yeah.
I had a good conversation with one of my kids yesterday who said they felt sorry for a gigapet. And we talked about anthropomorphism and had a good joke and laugh about it. But it's the danger of, if there is a danger to any of this, and like, sure, there's the whole like philosophical thing of like, what if you tell an artificial intelligence to find the most efficient way to make a paperclip, and then it decides that humans aren't necessary for the most efficient way to make a paperclip? So you could give it a seemingly easy task that then leads to the annihilation of the human race and all that. Like, I'm not talking about that, but what's wild in here is the human capacity to attribute causation and meaning and personhood to things that aren't. And so we see that.
Yeah, we do that very naturally. I mean,
faces you see in the clouds and in trees, and in you think your dog loves you, and you think your computer's your friend.
Well, Turkle was doing work on Tamagotchis back in the day too.
Yeah.
So I mean, she was onto this stuff before it really went haywire.
All right, kids, when you grow up, Grandpa McAllister will tell you what a Tamagotchi is or a Gigapet. But yeah, so
I never did get the white one. That was the one to have back then. But
you spoke German, right?
Popular color
as a kid. That's unhomely. As well.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more thing. All right, take a turn here, and then we can land this plane and let other people go on with thinking productive thoughts in their lives. But I was thinking about Jesus's promises to be with us, and in the embodiment of our faith in the physical. And I think that is the antidote to this, is to continue to press into the gift that the physical is, that other people are, even if we don't like them sometimes, or if they irritate us or wake up crying in the middle of the night with ridiculous request. That is part of what we were made for. And that your neighbor, the person you go to church with, that there's a real opportunity here, I think, particularly for evangelicals, to push into thinking about having a more embodied expression of their faith, and not just our faith, but other aspects and components of our lives as well. And so I think the digital world is phenomenal for information sharing. It's phenomenal for the fact that you and I get to share this format and other people to join along with us. It's wonderful for entertainment sometimes, but it is not a platform for living. And we're going to keep coming back to this over and over again. And it will be up to some of us older ones, I say this in my 30s laughingly, to cast a vision of real life that is alluring enough for people to want to pursue it. So I think the hunger is there. I think there's a real opportunity for the church to embody this and to live this out and call people to it well. But we want to recognize the parts of it that do have spiritual implications as well, particularly in how we think about how our faith is embodied, how we worship together. What are the categories in which digital technology is not a benefit, but merely a distraction to us? These are the questions we'll continue pondering as we move forward here. We should also say, Cameron, for anybody who's like, you know what, I think I do want to go download a chat bot just to see what this is like, is that there are massive data privacy issues with all of this as well. So all of these companies own your data, will share it with whoever are selling it. That's how they're making money. And they take no responsibility if your chat bot turns violent or convinces you to harm yourself. And so it's not the panacea of safety that we think it is, because we're dealing with technologies that are underdeveloped in a fallen and broken world that are programmed by humans who are less than perfect and don't have your best interest in mind. And so it's, as much as we'd like to separate out our realities into different little components and pockets, that's not going to happen. And our intimacy and our relationships also can't be divvied out like that either, and us have anything that resembles a meaningful or much less productive and faithful life following Christ. So, yep, put me down on this one with a yellow flag of caution of saying, this is sad that there's a need for this. It shows where there's an opportunity. But I think I'm going to say no on this one for me at this time, Cameron. Probably forever.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, hope that's been helpful to. Yeah, if you have any good thoughts or other examples, or want to push back or ask a good question, you can always send us an email at info@toltogether.com. For those of you on TOL Connect, great place to chime in there and help us think through these things as well. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, the podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.